Okay, today let us talk about intros. Now, when you were a freshman and a sophomore, what were the parts of the intro? Start with the hook. You have a thesis at the bottom and a bridge in the middle. So, when you were doing an intro, oftentimes a quote was a good way to pull in, right? So you might do a quote on war, and you would search for a quote on war, and it would say something like, Albert Einstein once said. Now let's get rid of that formatting. I know not with what weapons World War II will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. He is suggesting that the progression of technology means that humans now have the ability to destroy civilization. And then I told you to skip and go down to your thesis. The primary of the many causes of war, a conflict over resources, and philosophical differences are two of the most significant. Okay, so that is the hook. That is the thesis. What's the first body paragraph going to be over? Conflict over resources. What is the second body paragraph going to be over? Philosophical differences. By the way, I don't even think those are your two best options out of the readings, but I'm just pulling it out my butt. So how do you, because that's your hook, is your quote and your explanation. The thesis is the roadmap of what you're going to have coming in the paper. How do you come up with the bridge? You try and connect the two. A bridge transition, and by the way, bridge transitions exist in body paragraphs as well. In fact, I would encourage you to use more bridge transitions. And on the SAT test, they always have at least one of the language questions where they're like, which of these sentences would work best? One of them is always going to be a bridge transition. And you need to recognize that you need to pull a word from the bottom portion in to make the transition actually work. Because a bridge transition, you take the main ideas from the top. Is that my highlighter? That's my highlighter. So, weapons, World War III, fight, World War IV, sticks and stones. And then you take the main idea words from the bottom. Causes, war, conflict, differences, resources, philosophical. And then you write a sentence that has words from both. What am I pointing to? You take words from both the top and bottom and you put them together in one sentence. That's the only trick with a bridge. So a bridge might be because of the weapons humans now possess, we must care much more about the causes of war to avoid fighting with sticks and stones. Bam, bridge. World War III is entirely possible if cultures cannot acknowledge the causes of war and prevent them in order to prevent fighting. Bam, bridge. There is no magic to a bridge. A bridge just takes words from the top and words from the bottom and puts them together into one sentence. Okay? So, World War III is entirely possible if human cultures can't avoid the many causes of war that lead to fighting. World War III, is it from top or bottom? Top. Causes of war, top or bottom? Bottom. Fighting, top or bottom? Both. Fought and conflict. So, but my point is, a bridge is going to be anything that ties the top to the bottom, because that will move you from one to the other. And that was an intro freshman year. That would also work as an intro this year because it's a solid intro. But the question is, why does it work? Yes. Absolutely. And that's very true. And one of the things that makes this work, and your intro is never going to be as beefy as your body paragraphs, but one of the things that makes this work is it places war within a context. You are going with a bigger idea. Albert Einstein and this idea of the destruction of civilization. You're going with a big idea, and then you are saying, this is how my paper fits into that big idea. Sometimes body paragraphs, they feel like, am I boring you guys? Because some of you guys are like giving me the long stare. I don't see notes. I don't see eye contact. I just see blank stare. Are you with me? Back? Okay. Sometimes your body paragraphs feel a little bit like a cog in a wheel. They're perfectly functional, but I don't know what machine you're trying to drive. I don't understand what's the point of you writing this paragraph. Why is this paragraph important? In other words, you have no. The thing that drives somebody to want to write is called their exigence. Sometimes your paragraphs feel like they have no exigence. It's like, why is this important to talk about? Why is this important to write about? Your introduction is your prime place to talk about, why is this important? Well, if you look at this intro, what is the context? What is the exigence? The context is the context of war being dangerous. So your context is your big picture of war. What's your exigence? We have to understand it to stop it. Your introduction often sets those pieces up. Now, the problem is when you're doing an AP test, and quite frankly, sometimes when you're doing a college paper and it's late at night, the quotes are not always right on hand. You can't find the perfect quote that fits. And if you are trying to grab a quote that doesn't exactly work, it's really bad. Because then you're giving me a context that heads south, and then your paper goes north, and then as the reader, I'm like, what just happened? I don't understand the relationship between this quote, between this context, and where the paper is going. So, one of the things that you guys need to get good at doing is coming up with a more general form of context. Now, the form that the AP board kind of assumed that you guys would do is they assumed that all of you would have been in AP World and that all of you are in AP US and that for your introduction, you can get into full and formal Kairos context, which means you can give a discussion of war historically to a level that is deep enough that a college professor will read it and go, wow, this kid gets it. The problem is, a lot of you guys have probably not done AP World. How many of you were in AP World? Okay. A lot of you, that's great. But it's also true you did the 2020 version of AP World, which means you may not remember quite as much. And how many of you are in AP US? Fewer. And what that means is, like on the rhetorical analysis, when they give you something to analyze and say, hey, take a look at this piece of writing from this famous person and write an essay about why this writing is good, you may not know the historical context of the writing well enough to do an AP intro. You just may not have enough historical background. And I can't give you enough historical background in here to fake it. But guess what I can give you enough of to be able to fake every time? Well, not fake, because you really know it. What can I give you enough knowledge of that is a big picture context item that I can give you enough of to be able to get through any paper? Philosophy. It's why I have asked you to really pay attention to and keep the philosophical writings. Because this paper is successful because it gives the big picture. Although it should be indented, it's a paragraph. This is successful because it offers the big picture. Here is the big picture of war as presented by Albert Einstein. You are going to have to be able to get to that big picture without having a quote to lean on, which means it's going to come out of your head. So I want you to imagine that we are doing an essay on relationships, talking about healthy or unhealthy relationships. And we are using as evidence our psychology pieces. And we are using Ray Bradbury's Marionettes Incorporated. Remember those two marriages that were lovely, just falling apart at the seams? Yes. Which philosophers have something to say about relationships? Okay, Machiavelli. What does Machiavelli say about relationships? Okay, that you need to manipulate people. Okay, yes, that all relationships are transactional, that if you want to try and sort of get people to support you, that you have to generate either love or fear, preferably fear. That might not be appropriate for a essay on relationships unless you are really writing a very, very disturbing paper. So, kind of mentally go through them. Could we use Machiavelli? Yes, it would be a little bit harder. What was the first philosopher we learned? Plato. Allegory of the Cave. Could Allegory of the Cave relate to healthy and unhealthy relationships? What? Maybe. How?
How when you go into a relationship, it's kind of blind and it requires one person to step out of the cave and guide the other one to learn more about how this relationship works.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
When you enter a relationship with somebody, like you both have to be able to step out of that cave, out of that kind of like idealized idea you have of that person, and be able to step into the truth and see who they truly are.
How many of us have had relationships with a cave version of our significant other? We didn't really know them. We only saw what we thought they were. Any of us after the fact that realized that we never had a relationship with the actual person, just the shadow?
Maybe you're silent for a reason.
Yeah. Or could we talk about how society creates a cave? That, we've got Disney movies and romance novels that tell us how relationships should look. And because our relationships don't look like that, suddenly we think they're falling apart. We think they're unhealthy because they don't look like, birds coming down out of the trees to carry things for us. Would that work?
Yeah.
Okay. What's the next philosopher that we looked at? Pema Chödrön. What was her philosophy?
Focus on living the present moment. Have gratitude.
Okay, this Buddhism, this idea that you live in the present, that you accept who you are. Could that tie to healthy relationships?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Because a lot of people, what do they do in relationships? They're always looking at,
Other people, they want more.
they're comparing to other people. They're looking at the future. Well, we'll take care of our relationship 5 years from now when school is over. We will fix our relationship 10 years from now when the kids go to college. But because they're always postponing, are they ever dealing? No. So we could certainly use that. Who is our next philosopher? Starts with a K.
Can't.
Kant. What is Kant's big philosophy?
Any virtue can be corrupted.
What?
Any virtue can be corrupted.
Yes, and that the only virtue that can be corrupted is
Goodwill.
goodwill. And that the only rule we should live by is, what's the categorical imperative?
Oh, to do everything you wish other people do as well.
Right, that you should only do things that you would want to become a rule for the entire human race. Could we focus on that with relationships?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Can something like love or devotion be corrupted? Oh, heck yes. What do you think codependency is? What do you think abusive relationships are? Abusive relationships are based on love, but love that has been corrupted to the point that people will put up with anything. They will put up with abuse. So we could definitely, so when you stop and in your mind kind of create a checklist of all the philosophers, could these philosophies in fact apply to the topic? Yes. Now, in this case, Machiavelli would be one that would not, because he's more about leaders and followers rather than like in a relationship. At least we hope that he is not applying his philosophies to like married couples, because that would be exceptionally disturbing. Yes.
So if you did want to do that person to write that piece of paper, would that be too risky for an AP test, or could you attempt it?
Well, here's the deal with taking big risks and writing something that is really outside the box. Either they are really going to appreciate your risk, and you will have followed the rules of writing. You will just have twisted it to the point that you leave the reader going, but what? And they're going to give you a 5. They're going to be like, dang, this kid knows how to step out of the box and still hold the spine of good writing in place. This is impressive. Twisted, but impressive. But when you start twisting, if the spine of the writing skills slip even a little bit, it's going to start sounding really, really bad. And so you're more likely, in fact, to fall down to the failing paper. So when you take risks, you are more likely to reach higher, but you're also more likely to fall. And that is why I always tell kids I cannot teach a student to earn a 5 on an AP test. I can teach you to earn a 4. 100% I can teach you to earn a 4. But a 5 is what happens when a 4 kid takes risks. And some kids are willing to take risks, and some kids are not comfortable taking risks, and both approaches are perfectly valid. But if you take risks, you are taking risks. So if you do something funky, sometimes it turns out very well. The year that the prompt was something really weird. It was something like, what is something that is overrated? And one of my kids is like, I completely just failed because, man, I don't know what happened to me, but I just went off on that essay. She went off about something that was like fairly like, really? That's what you went off on? And she said she went off on like movies and, women in movies, and she just went off. She got a 5. So my guess is that even though she felt like she was going off, she held the spine very, very tightly. And my guess is she was probably saying something important about women not being portrayed well in the movies. But she actually did very, very well. But she did that well because she took big, big risks. And afterwards, she regretted taking those risks until she got her score, and then she was okay. But do realize I can't teach you to get a 5. I can teach you to get a 4. And if you are not comfortable taking risks, a 4 and a 5 are equivalent in every university in the state. So they make no difference between those two. It's not like history, where if you know more history, you get a higher score. Okay, so once you kind of go through the checklist, decide Machiavelli doesn't work, Plato, Kant, and Chadron all would work. By the way, by the time you get to the end of this, you're going to have a great big long checklist. You're like, Jonathan Edwards, Mencius, you're going to have a really big checklist. So you're going to have a lot to pull from. So once you decide what you want to pull from, then what you're going to do is you're going to give the background of that philosopher and how it applies to your subject. Kant suggests that every virtue, with the exception of goodwill, can be corrupted. Hard work can become, if you push it too hard, obsession. Give me another virtue. I'm drawing a blank. Intelligence can turn to manipulation. Love can twist into now, is all of that indicative of Kant's real philosophy? Yes. So you have to make sure you're being accurate to the philosopher you're naming. Then you skip and you go into thesis. So I always do the bridge last. Individuality. Okay. Then I can go through and I can say, okay, what are my main idea words? Kant, come on, highlighter on. Kant, virtue, goodwill, corrupted. Now, these are sort of examples of that basic idea, so I'm not going to highlight those. Healthy relationships, hard work, mutual respect, individuality. What's the rule with a bridge? Has to take words from the top and the bottom. Kant might not have directly addressed the idea of healthy relationships, but he did discuss what? Look at a word from the top. Mm,
Virtuous behavior.
did write about the virtues that people need to exhibit. Healthy relationships require both hard work and a mutual respect for each other's individuality. That is why we proofread. So, do you see the similarities between this and what we did freshman year with the hook bridge intro? It still is a hook bridge intro, but because oftentimes you're going to be doing this timed writing where you don't have that ability to go and find a quote, to go and find a statistic, you have to be able to rely more on yourself to provide that context that will make the paper feel like those paragraphs are not just random cogs in a wheel. Those paragraphs are, in fact, working together to drive towards this bigger issue. This paragraph now this intro feels like whatever body paragraphs you give me, it is going to be driving towards this philosophical idea of making sure that the virtues you have do not get corrupted. Now, in a perfect world, am I going to have some references to Kant then in my commentary?
Yes, right?
Yes. Because in a perfect world, because this is now the cab of the truck that's driving all of the trailers behind, if this is the context to which you're driving, commentary should at least once per paragraph reference back to that. So in each of the two body paragraphs, I would expect somewhere in there to say something about Kant would certainly see this as a corruption of love. Kant would certainly suggest that respect is part of goodwill. So, in a perfect world, you don't just tie back to the thesis. Because remember, every body paragraph, the commentary should come back to the thesis. That's what you did as freshmen. But in a perfect world, whatever context, whatever exigence you're giving me, it's important to talk about this issue of relationships. Because these are the virtues you cannot allow to be corrupted. That's what you're now telling me is the exigence, which means that hook should now appear somewhere in the commentary. That becomes part of your line of reasoning. I'm going to stop while you take notes because this is important stuff. Yes.
So every AP intro just requires us on some kind of context, place the pieces within.
Yes.
So if we did really want to do history, we could do that.
Yes, if you want to do history, if you want to give the historical context of something, I am 100% fine with that, and that's actually a little closer to what the AP probably expects. Because of course, Kairos is the historical context, particularly when you're doing a rhetorical analysis, where you're writing something about here's why this writing is effective. Here are the techniques this author is using. They would expect you to put that writing within historical context. But the fact is, some of you may not have the historical context to do that. And if you can place it within the philosophical context, you will get that full credit. I have lots of kids get 4s and 5s on the AP test on philosophical background intros. It's just sometimes students feel a little safer having a list of 10 philosophers that they can checklist through. as opposed to trying to think, okay, all of history. How do I place this within all of history? Make sense? Yeah. You're welcome. So for this paper, I am going to require you to do a philosophical context. You have, Chidron, Machiavelli, Kant, and Plato. Between the four of those, you certainly should be able to get the concept of war to fit into one of them. Now, what is the conclusion? Conclusion, we're not changing at all from freshman year. Conclusion, what do? Restate the thesis. Then,
Your claims?
well, that's restating the thesis. Yep, tie it back to the hook. And when you were freshmen, I then gave you a third one, which is to talk about why this is important in real life. But guess what? Your hook is telling me why it's important in real life, yes? So these two things are really the same thing. Now, should it be just 2 sentences? No. You probably should have something that is roughly the size of your introduction. And sometimes that means that students will take 2 or 3 sentences to restate the thesis, so that they will kind of go into each of those body paragraphs and what can be learned from each. Sometimes that means students spend a significant amount of time tying back to the hook and going back and talking about, see, told you, this is exactly what Kant was talking about. I don't care what it is that you spend time developing. I will tell you, on the timed writing, it is not unusual that kids run out of time and you see the restatement of the thesis and then they move on to the next essay. A conclusion should be a mic drop moment where you're like, yeah, booyah, told you Kant would agree with me, told you that's what Kant would have to say. However, on a timed writing, do you always have time to do the mic drop moment? Sometimes you don't. So on a take-home essay, I would expect your conclusion maybe to not be as long as an intro, but to be coming up on that length, because you up front told me that what was important here was that idea that Kant is suggesting that virtues can be twisted. And if you want to have a healthy relationship, there are 2 virtues you cannot allow to be twisted. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. Questions on intros and conclusions? Do you want to see a sample of a conclusion, or are you good?
Yeah.
Sample? Yeah. Okay. So I see healthy relationships are hard work and mutual respect. So where's my mouse? There it is. Hard work is one virtue that couples cannot allow to be twisted if they want a relationship to work. Mutual respect is another. If those 2 virtues are not defended in a relationship, then the relationship has no hope of success in the long term. If, as Kant suggests, happens, individuals twist those virtues. If hard work becomes obsession, or if mutual respect becomes, if you respect someone too much, maybe codependency. Then a relationship has no hope of long-term success. I'm repeating long-term too much. So you see, the blueprint is still there. You still have that repetition of the thesis and a tie back to the opening hook. But there is a richer, more flexible approach to that blueprint. The repetition of the thesis is not one sentence, but two. The tie back to the hook is multiple sentences talking about virtues and cons. So this is where your voice comes out and you put emphasis on the part that you want to put emphasis on. But do you see how if this is your intro and this is your conclusion, somewhere in each of the body paragraphs, you should probably say something about twisting virtues? Yes? Okay. Guess what you have the rest of the hour to do? You have the rest of the hour to work with your partners